It's not ending. It's closing in, the terrorism on Israel from all different directions. We can't demonstrate weakness on one front because that would send the wrong signal to all other enemies who are taking notes and waiting for their turn to attack.
Welcome to Stakelbeck Tonight. I'm Erick Stakelbeck, and forget Hamas. Apparently, it's all Benjamin Netanyahu's fault. At least, that's the message we're getting from the Israeli left and the Biden administration in the wake of Saturday's demonic Hamas execution of 6 hostages, including an American citizen. Much of the world seems to be focusing its anger not on the Hamas murderers, but on Israel's prime minister. The reason? Bibi refuses to agree to a ceasefire deal with Hamas that would leave the terror group intact and capable of threatening Israel in the future. A deal that would allow Hamas to regroup, reassert its control over Gaza, and potentially carry out more October 7ths. That's why the chief sticking point in the negotiations is the Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. Now, this is the chief transit point that Hamas uses to smuggle weapons into Gaza. So naturally, Netanyahu wants Israel to have control there so that Hamas cannot rearm, because if given the chance, they will rearm with help from the Iranian regime. So again, it seems like common sense to control the Philadelphia corridor and prevent a restored Hamas. But we live in times where common sense is not so common. Folks, the barbaric Hamas murder of 6 hostages in Rafah over the weekend was absolutely evil and gut-wrenching. Hamas reportedly shot the captives at close range while Israeli forces closed in. As mentioned, one of the victims was a 23-year-old Israeli-American named Heinrich Poland. Our hearts break for his family, including his mother, Rachel, an incredibly brave woman who's appeared here on TBN to raise awareness, ask for prayer, and call for Hirsch's release. Unfortunately, Hamas is a group of murderous modern-day Nazis who are not really interested in any sort of credible agreement. But that didn't stop Joe Biden over the weekend from placing blame not on Hamas, but on Benjamin Netanyahu. Take a look.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Mr. President, what is your reaction?
This is the same Joe Biden who pressured Israel for months to not enter Rafah, where clearly hostages were and are being held. Now, Biden was joined in his Bibi bashing by hundreds of thousands of Israeli protesters in Tel Aviv, calling for Netanyahu's removal and an immediate ceasefire, no matter the price, apparently. Folks, it is agonizing that dozens of hostages, including at least 5 Americans, remain in Hamas's clutches. But could Israel really be at the point where it should put raw emotion over wisdom and basically trust Hamas, the same Hamas that just murdered 6 hostages in cold blood? Netanyahu responded at a press conference on Sunday.
On August 28th, that's 5 days ago, Deputy CIA Director said that Israel shows seriousness in the negotiations. Now Hamas must show the same seriousness. I want to ask you something. What has changed in the last 5 days? What has changed? One thing. These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions? What message does this send Hamas? It says, kill more hostages, murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions.
Folks, we live in times that the prophet Isaiah described very accurately, where good is called evil and evil is called good. So much to break down. The Middle East is on fire, and we're joined tonight by an all-star Israel panel, including a former spokesperson for Prime Minister Netanyahu, to discuss why all of this matters to you. It seems that Benjamin Netanyahu is receiving the lion's share of the blame for a lack of a ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. Do you think that's sort of upside down when we're dealing with a vicious terror organization, the blame being laid at Israel's feet?
Well, Eric, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here in studio with you. Look, we said it earlier before, it's about blame the Jews. That's what the game is. We are fighting on an asymmetric battlefield against a terrorist group who uses its own civilians and its own children as human shields. And that is their MO. What they want is to blame Israel, to blame the Jews for that which they are guilty of, which is putting civilians in harm's way, and for murder and for terrorism. And what's particularly appalling is when you see Western media and Western government officials playing into that blame game, especially when Netanyahu has accepted every single deal that was put forward and Hamas hasn't. It is Hamas who started this war. It is Hamas who's engaged in a genocidal campaign to murder not just Jews, but all Westerners, all infidels. And it is Hamas that is responsible for this war and is holding the hostages.
Yeah, and Brooke, it's insane. The world is taking the bait and taking the Hamas narrative. Tal, tell us, and look, you've been in high-level discussions in the Prime Minister's office over the past few months. Tell us about the importance of keeping the Philadelphia corridor for Israel, and what are some of the more unreasonable Hamas demands in these hostage and ceasefire negotiations?
So first, taking the bait is the exact correct term. I want to highlight what you just said, because unfortunately, public pressure and internal pressure in Israel is the main leverage that Hamas holds. And anyone out there who's putting pressure on Israel instead of on Hamas right now is just prolonging the war. It's not going to get us any closer to a hostage release ceasefire deal. That's the truth of the matter. The prime minister is, and not only the prime minister, we should say the war cabinet, because Benjamin Netanyahu, he's not working alone. They are showing flexibility in the negotiations where they can, not where they can't. We want to prevent another October 7th massacre, and that's the one thing that Hamas and its leader Sinwar have in mind. And it's not only about the Philadelphia corridor that I'll get to in a moment. There are a few hurdles out there in the negotiations, but yes, that's one of the main sticking points. That is the border between Gaza and Egypt. Right now, it's in control of Israeli forces. And you know what we discovered there? We destroyed about 150 terror tunnels that lead from Gaza to Egypt. That is the main artery from which Hamas has armed itself with all the ammunitions and terror infrastructure that funneled in over the years and created this terror base called Gaza. So if we give up the control of this territory, we just go back to the reality of October 6th, and that is something that Israelis can't live with.
Yeah, it's a non-starter. Brooke, about 30 seconds until the break. Kamala Harris said she looked at the maps of Rafah and Israel shouldn't go in. Clearly there were and are hostages in Rafah.
Yes, and I question, why are Western leaders pushing Israel not to go and take control of the Philadelphia corridor? That is clearly where Hamas is smuggling in weapons from Egypt. Egypt is apparently an ally to both the United States and Israel. All of those who are pushing for Israel to relinquish that corridor back to Hamas, as you know, it was just said, want this war to continue. They want to keep Hamas in power, and that is frankly not an option. Hamas will no longer be in power after this war. It is an existential threat, not just to Israel, but for all democracies to reward terrorism.
Tal, we're talking about blaming Israel and putting the onus on Israel rather than Hamas. The UK over the weekend announced that it is banning some arms shipments to Israel. Now, this is a new left-wing government in the UK. This was very troubling, to say the least. What's your take on this? The UK, in a time of Israel's greatest need, essentially throwing Israel under the bus and withholding crucial arms shipments.
It's a shameful decision, and keep in mind that Hamas also took in on October 7th British citizens, not only just Israelis, by the way. And it comes right after they executed 6 hostages, including an Israeli American, Heinrich Poland. The timing is terrible. The decision itself is terrible. What kind of message does it send to Hamas? They are playing right into Hamas's hands. That is, Eric, what's the entire strategy of Yahya Sinwar is based upon. This kind of international pressure. If someone really wants to secure the release of as many hostages as possible and see an end to the war in Gaza, an end to Hamas, they would back Israel up. They would not cut, arms deals with Israel and so forth, because this is what Sinwar wants. He wants to stay in power, live another day to carry out another October 7th massacre, and international pressure of this kind is just serving this goal.
Tal, well said. And Brooke, Tal makes a good point. To me, this is very black and white. There's really no gray area here. It's good and evil, and yet on American college campuses, in the streets of Europe, we see vicious anti-Semitic rallies. You've been following this very closely. You head up the End Jew Hatred movement. Give us your take on what you've seen unfold right here in the United States and across the Western world since October 7th.
Eric, I'm so happy you called them anti-Semitic rallies. I'd also say they're anti-American rallies. These are not pro-Palestinian rallies. Nothing about them is advocating for civil rights for any type of Palestinian Muslim people. What we're seeing is the import of the Islamist Marxist ideology and tactics to American college campuses. And unfortunately, we have been turning a blind eye to what is happening in this country, which is the billions of dollars coming from states like Qatar, from China, from Russia,
even
onto
Iran.
Our campuses and Iran to radicalize American youth to be anti-American, to be anti-Israel, but also to sow discord and to be pro-terror in our country. And I'm so proud to be one of the founders of the End Jew Hatred movement, which is the first ever Jewish civil rights movement in American history. And what we aim to do is, in a grassroots fashion, mobilize the Jewish community to stand up for themselves, to demand equal protection, and to demand that civil rights law is enforced. Because too often we see people using the excuse of Israel and foreign policy and foreign politics as an excuse to turn around and to discriminate against Jewish people, especially Jewish students, because they are Jewish. And no matter what you think of Israel, that is not an affirmative defense to engage in discrimination against someone because of where they're born, because of their skin color, or of course, because of their religion. And I would argue this, that the Jewish civil rights cause is the most important and greatest cause of our lifetime.
Agreed. And it starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. And Brooke, you're doing such great work as a civil rights, human rights attorney at the Lawfare Project, folks. Check out Brooke's great work. And of course, this End Jew Hatred movement. And dovetailing off of that, Tal, look, we have what's going on in Gaza right now, but also Israel has conducted operations over the past week in the West Bank, also known as the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. And we're seeing protests over that as well, including at the UN. Why is it so important for Israel to get a handle on the Iran-backed terror network in the West Bank as well?
Well, Israel is focusing its operations in 2 major cities in the West Bank right now, Tulkarem and Jenin. Mini Gazas, if you will, Eric. We're apprehending and eliminating dozens of terrorists there, Hamas terrorists and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists. And this story, of Judea and Samaria and the terrorism over there, it gets a bit overlooked, I think, and gets lost in global media because all the attention goes to the war in the south and the war with Hezbollah in the north. But, just this past Friday, we were able to foil 2 car-bombing terrorist attacks. Unfortunately, 4 Israelis got injured, but we managed to thwart them. And just yesterday, or Sunday rather, 3 Israeli police officers were killed in the West Bank. One of them lost his daughter on October 7th. It's not ending. It's closing in, the terrorism on Israel from all different different directions. We can't demonstrate weakness on one front because that would send the wrong signal to all other enemies who are taking notes and waiting for their turn to attack.
Brooke, we talked about the End Jew Hatred movement, which you're helping to spearhead. Amazing movement. The college campus right now, and we're just starting the school year back up, has been an absolute hotbed of anti-Israel and anti-American venom, but you're not taking this lying down. The Lawfare Project is going after these schools that aid and abet anti-Semitism. Tell us more about it.
So I'm a very proud founder and executive director of the Lawfare Project, which is a Jewish civil rights public interest law firm and litigation fund. And we represent students across the world, have a high concentration, obviously, in the United States of America, and we are bringing legal actions on their behalf against schools like Columbia University, against Carnegie Mellon University, against Cooper Union. We're negotiating with the school district in Nevada when one of our clients, an autistic student, came home with a swastika carved into his back. We have
in America
in
2024.
Exactly. You know, as the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I really didn't think it was possible that we would be witnessing what is going on right now on campus. But the point is that the law is on our side. The truth is on our side. And a big part of my job is to motivate and encourage the Jewish community to stand up for themselves. The Jewish community is the oldest, most persecuted minority community in human history, Erick, and there is no reason why we should not take advantage of civil rights laws just like every other minority community has done. So that is what we are doing.
Very great points. And a few of the schools you're going after, these are some of the main, Ivy League institutions.
Absolutely. Columbia University.
Renowned universities, yeah.
Jewish students are being harassed there. Our client was retaliated against. She was requesting accommodations. She was denied safety accommodations, which is absolutely outrageous given that you see what's going on campus right now.
It's open, violent, physical anti-Semitism.
Correct. And it also bears mentioning that Carnegie Mellon University, that we're also suing, is reportedly the third largest recipient of funds from Qatar. Qatar being the second largest sponsor of the Hamas terrorist organization. What on earth are our lawmakers doing allowing these foreign funds to come into our country to, what I describe as the most insidious, largest subversive influence campaign this country has ever seen. It has to be stopped, and the onus really is on members of Congress to stop the foreign funding that's coming in to poison our students in America.
Tal, the Biden administration has actually acknowledged that they believe Iran is helping to fund some of these protests on American college campuses over the past month or so. We've been awaiting. Iran says it's going to strike Israel. We haven't seen that yet. Any take on that? What are your thoughts on a potential Iranian onslaught against Israel that we've heard so much about from the Iranian regime since August 1st?
Well, Iran is behind everything. It's not just a war between Israel and Hamas, even though much of our attention is focused right now on what's happening between Israel and Gaza. We have to remember that Iran funds Hamas, Iran funds Hezbollah. Remember that we have about 60,000 residents of the north in Israel who still, since October 7th, haven't been able to return home. That is an equation that has to change. And the question is, will it be through war or through diplomacy? But one way or another, and of course the Houthis in Yemen, by the way, who up until recently, up until Israel launched a very massive strike at the Hodeidah port in Yemen, also dared to attack us directly from their territory. One Israeli citizen was killed by a drone that flew in from Yemen, all the way surprisingly hit in Tel Aviv. So Israel is acting against Iran in various ways, and whoever wants to see calm in the region has to direct pressure at Iran, at the mullahs who sit in Tehran. We cannot appease them. Appeasement of terrorism never panned out well throughout history.
Unfortunately, the state of radicalization happening in our country, I truly believe that we need to declare a state of emergency. We see the protests happening on the streets of New York, on the streets of LA. They're chanting death to America, death to the Jews. There has to be accountability. We must demand, as citizens of this country, accountability accountability for our lawmakers. And of course, we have to caution against the divide, the partisan political divide that we're seeing, which only weakens us. It weakens us here in the United States, and on all the divisions in Israel weakens the Israeli state as well. And I think Toa will also speak to this about unity being one of the most important things that we need to stress
Brooke,
right now.
well said as always. The Lawfare Project and Jew Hate, a great movement. Brooke is helping spearhead. Check that out. Tal, final thoughts from New York. How can we pray right now about this situation?
I'll pick it up from where Brooke just left it. Pray for unity within Israel. Pray for unity between Israel and its allies. Let's close the ranks. We all want the same outcome. We want the hostages back home. We want Hamas gone. We want a Gaza that will never pose a terror threat to Israel ever again. And that our enemies will just realize that the Jewish state is here and it's here to stay. Now, the faster we get to this outcome is dependent upon how united we stand. It's as simple as that. So please pray for unity.
Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.